Today, we're honored to have with us an international scholar who has given a huge impact in the field of second language writing. He will share with us ways in addressing the challenges that will confront us after this pandemic has died down. Our speaker is Professor of English and Director of Second Language Writing at the Arizona State University. He has delivered lectures in applied linguistics, rhetoric and composition, and TESOL in different countries such as Thailand, Japan, China, Taiwan, and the USA. He is the founding chair of the Symposium on Second Language Writing. He is the past president of the American Association for Applied Linguistics. During that period, he serves as the founding chair of the Committee on Second Language Writing and the chair of the Non-Native English Speakers in TESOL caucus. In addition, our speaker has served as program developer, evaluator, and consultant for various language programs and graduate programs throughout the United States and around the world. His research expertise revolve around second language writing, a field of specialization informed by theoretical and methodological insights from rhetoric, composition, and applied linguistics. Everyone, let us all welcome Professor Dr. Paul K. Matsuda.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for inviting me for this seminar. Can you all hear me okay? If you can hear me, wave.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, good. All right. So today I'm going to talk about post-COVID-19 writing instruction. And I will tell you honestly that I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But there are certain things that we know, and there are certain things that we can do in order to be flexible and in order to respond to various evolving situations, such as the ones that we have been witnessing, but there are going to be many more bumps and hills that we will encounter. So we need to be prepared, and I'm hoping that this webinar will help all of us feel a little more prepared than we were before. Okay, so this is what we are responding to. You've seen this image everywhere. This is a copyright-free image of COVID-19, the virus itself. And it has affected all aspects of our lives. How we travel, how we talk to each other, how we teach, how we write. And also, it has changed the ways in which we interact with each other quite a bit, especially in the online environment. Now, these days, we have been hearing lots of fake news, conspiracy theories, and inaccurate information, misinformation, all over the internet and elsewhere in individual conversations and so on. And here are some of the conspiracy theories that I've witnessed over the few months. Some people argued that this is a lab-made virus. This is not a natural phenomenon, and it has been debunked by scientists who have been studying the virus and its development. But some people seem to spread the news without thinking critically. And other people have argued that this is a biological weapon developed and deployed by certain countries or certain groups of people. And other people, and I don't know where this came from, said this virus was created or caused by the 5G technology that's spreading, that's being developed and implemented throughout the world. Now, 5G does emit certain amount of radiation, the radio wave, but did it cause the development of this virus? Unlikely. But nevertheless, people have been spreading this rumor. And some people said this was created as a result of the genetically modified organism. And again, that's a myth, but many people like to find explanations for things that we don't understand. And some people even deny the existence of COVID-19. And they say this is a fake crisis that was created for certain reasons. And other people have said this is politically motivated. In order to make someone look bad, another oppositional party came up with this idea. And again, we all know that these claims don't carry much weight because everybody in the whole world is experiencing this. It's not just a single country, single political party, and so on. And so there are some malicious misinformation that's being spread for whatever reasons. But then there are some genuine misinformation and misunderstanding about this situation. You know, something as simple as fatality risk has been a point of argument, right? Fatality risk is the chance of dying from COVID-19. And we don't know the exact figure because the fatality risk depends on the number of people who are dying in relation to the number of people who catch the disease. But we don't know exactly how many people have this disease, have this virus, because not everybody is being tested. And tests may not be entirely accurate. So there is some variability in the numbers. And the death rate, it seems simpler, but there are complications. Maybe people are dying not directly because of the virus, but for other reasons, but they just happen to have the virus. Right? So the figure, depending on how you calculate, can fluctuate quite a bit. And some people who want to dismiss this virus will want to believe the lowest figure. And people who want to be cautious tend to believe the highest figure. And then there is this debate going on. And a wise response to this situation, of course, is to prepare for the worst and to hope for the best. But that's not how most people's minds seem to operate, especially when their decisions, their interpretations is tied to some financial interests, political interests, and so forth, or ideological interests. And some people have claimed that it's going to disappear. We know who did it. And many people have been spreading this idea, but so far we haven't seen that happening, right? And other people have claimed that the UV light is going to kill this virus. Well, if that were the case, Arizona would have been the safest place because we've got lots of sunlight, but we do have our share of COVID-19 cases. So this is not going to help. And injecting disinfectants into your body, it might kill the virus, but it can also kill you. So please don't try this at home, right? But again, some people have been saying this and through some official channels as well. Some people want to believe that, well, alcohol does seem to kill the germ. Not the germ, this is not a germ, this is a virus. The alcohol can kill COVID-19 virus, but it has to be pretty strong, 75%. And drinking strong alcohol isn't going to kill it. So don't try it either. It's not going to help. It has to be 75% or stronger, right? And another misinformation is ibuprofen. It's a kind of painkiller that many people take. And one government official from a European country posted this, and they were trying to help, but it turned out to be based on a single case, and it was not verified, and it has been debunked since then. But it does sound like something that we have to listen to, right? So we have to be really careful, but we want to not do something because we don't know something for sure, right? So where do we draw the line? And that's an important consideration that everybody's struggling with. And some people have said antibacterial soap is going to help, but of course, COVID-19 is not a bacteria, so antibacterial part does not help, but any old regular soap will help. That much we know for sure, for now. And we've seen the shortage of toilet papers all over the world. And when some crisis happens, for some reason, people spread the rumor that toilet papers are going to be completely sold out. So go out and start buying. And of course, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because people go out and buy it just in case, toilet papers goes out, and then people start panicking. That rumor was true, right? And we have currently, I think we are over the toilet paper phase, but we have been debating the efficacy of masks, whether, to what extent, and why, and how we should wear masks or some kind of face coverings. And there's been a lot of mess. And again, people want to interpret it however that's convenient to their own interest, their own convenience. Now, in a situation like this, where there's a lot of misinformation, fake news, and conspiracy theories, we need to approach all of communication critically and very carefully. So in order to survive and in order to live well and to not do harm to other people, we need to develop a different kind of literacy. Some of these you may have seen under other campaigns like the 21st century literacy or critical literacy. Yes, there are lots of overlaps among all of these movements, and they are all important. But here are some of the key literacy skills and mentality that are really important, especially under the post-COVID-19 world order. We need to have the ability to understand and evaluate information, their sources, and then their intentions. Sometimes I get fooled and I post something and other people point out that, well, this is a politically motivated comment, and then I have to make a decision. I have to study more, and then I have to take it back. It happens. It happens to everyone, you know, and the ability to critically engage, but when you're wrong, to correct your information, correct your attitude. Now, that's another important sensibility that we need to develop in this time of crisis and confusion. And more, we are relying on secondhand information, memes, or someone's off-the-cuff comments, or someone might say, this is really bad. You know how bad it is. I'm not going to even tell you, but you know. No, we don't, right? So rather than relying on secondhand information or unreliable sources of information, we need to be able to read original scientific research. Or if not, at least we need to be able to read reports of scientific research critically. Some people seem to believe that science is absolute. It's not. Scientists don't have all the answers. We are trying to eliminate misinformation and try to come up with more data, more interpretations that are more reliable, but it's never perfect. So even when it's a published research article, we still need to engage in critical dialogue with those insights. And that's not the kind of skills that everybody has, but people who are college educated should develop some of this ability so that we can spread more high quality information and not be fooled by partial information or tentative information, thinking that this is going to be the final result or final answer. And we need to also have the ability to process and synthesize information. When we are faced with evolving situations, we don't have all the answers in one package. Sometimes there are attempts to synthesize and present, here are some of the best practices, here are some of the guidelines. And when we have those guidelines, we still have to be careful because those guidelines can change over time with more information, more insights. But still, at the beginning, we don't have a coherent set of information to guide our decisions. So, and instead, what we are getting is bits and pieces of information from different sources. So Individually, we all need to develop and exercise the ability to process the information that we are taking in, to get rid of misinformation, low quality information, and to interpret high quality information with a grain of salt, and then to try to connect it to the larger picture. This kind of ability has always been important, but especially in this type of situation, we really need to develop the ability to critically process and synthesize the information that we are taking in. And we are not just passive consumers of information anymore. When you post something on Facebook or other social media, we are spreading information. So when we do it, we have to be careful not to spread misinformation. And we want to be accurate and we want to be insightful. And that takes a lot of practice. It's not something that comes naturally. We all have to practice and get better at communicating with different media effectively so that we can help spread good information. And if there is misinterpretation, we need to be able to engage in conversations so that everybody will have better information. And sometimes we get comments in response to our postings. For example, I said something about the airports attempt to maintain social distancing during the ticketing process. And somebody said, well, it's not going to help because when you get on board, you're going to be breathing the air that other people have been breathing out. And when somebody says something like that and tries to dismiss good quality information or good attempts, what do? We need to have the tact, we need to have the skill to respond to them without shutting them out, but to engage in a conversation so that they can begin to listen to us and then come to a better understanding of the situation, right? And this kind of dialogue happens in academic contexts as well. When somebody publishes an article, another author might publish a response, and then a dialogue happens. Some clarifications, clarifying misunderstandings, adding more information, or retracting something that was not accurate or misguiding, right? That's another kind of social engagement skills that we all need to develop, not just in academic context, but in everyday life. And when we try to communicate with other people, we no longer rely on texts only or speech only, but increasingly we are using images, videos, and memes. So learning how to design these multimedia documents and how to use the tools in order to create them effectively and efficiently is something that we also need to learn as individuals and as someone who work in higher education. We are in a position to inform other people as teachers, right? So we all need to develop this ability as well. And the kind of writing that many people need to engage is not just academic. In fact, most people, when they graduate from undergraduate programs, are never going to be using research paper writing skills, but they will be spending more time writing maybe reports, news reports, or secondary representation of what they have read, the opinion pieces, editorials, and many other ways of communicating, not just information, but their insights and their feelings. So we need to pay attention to that kind of literacy skill in order to prepare students for the world that we are facing in the near future. So how can we accomplish these things? I'm going to break down different segments of writing and talk about each step in some detail. So the first thing that we might do is to design writing assignments in order to raise the awareness, in order to help students think more critically, and to present their ideas clearly and with fairness and accuracy and sense of ethics, right? And one of the primary ways of motivating students other than the grades, is to make writing assignments relevant to students' lives. If we can create writing assignments that are related to something that students are already thinking about, or what's something that students are already doing, then it becomes more meaningful. And this afternoon, I was spending some time with my daughter, and we were eating, and after that, she started doing her homework. And her homework assignment was to study the history of infectious diseases. And she was writing, one of the questions required her to write a paragraph about the similarity between the early 20th century US and another country which had similar medical conditions. And so she identified, I think it was Ethiopia, which had a high level of infectious diseases, including lower respiratory diseases and other health conditions that was infectious. And so in the process of studying the subject matter and writing about it, she was learning about the current situation, and she was gaining a better understanding of what kind of situation we are experiencing and what other historical or geographic places and moments had similar conditions, so we can learn from their experience as well, right? So that's an good example of relevant pedagogy, writing assignment. And when we ask students to write about the pandemic, we can, first of all, have students write about their own experience. What was it like to go through something? Were you worried? Was anybody affected, right? And how did you feel? What did you do about it? Writing about what they were experiencing and how they felt can help them process their experience so that they can understand it better. And then they can build on that experience in order to act more responsibly or more effectively in the future. And it may also help generate more questions so that they can gain relevant information for the current situation that they're facing. And for some students, their parents, their loved ones, or themselves may have been affected negatively. And if that's the case, they may need the time to grieve and to process that intense emotional experience. And writing about those experiences could help them heal the wounds in their hearts. And one thing that I want to be careful here is that writing about traumatic experience can be powerful. It can be a useful way of helping them process and come to terms with what they are living through. But at the same time, some experiences are just so traumatic that writing about it can make it worse. So if you are going to integrate anything like this, having students write about their traumatic experience, my suggestion is not to make it a required component, but to make it optional. And if students choose not to write about it, then let them be. Let them do something different, because it is important that students process their experience and to learn more about it. But if it's making them hurt even more, then that's defeating the purpose. So we have to be sensitive to how students feel about these things and be reasonable in assigning any types of assignments. And writing can also be a powerful tool for learning. When we are writing about something, we often realize things that we didn't even think about. There may be a contradiction in our thoughts, but we may not see it until we write it down and read it again. So by writing about what they know, what they think, they may be able to process and do some quality checks on the kind of information that they're getting, why they are doing what they are doing. And that's an important intellectual process as well. And we can also have students generate good piece of information and then spread that information effectively and persuade other people to take appropriate action, given the best information that we have at this point. So these are all different kinds of writing assignments, types of writing tasks that can help students deal with the pandemic situation. And we can also apply this type of pedagogy to other types of traumatic or crisis situation. And these are difficult times for everyone, emotionally and financially, physically. We are constrained in many ways. So completing assignments could be extra challenging for students. So instead of giving them one big assignment that's going to make or break their final grade, it would be a good idea to break down the assignments into small chunks and then have them work on different aspects of the intellectual work over time. So that if they skip one process, or if they miss one assignment, or if they don't perform too well, then they don't lose the entire course grade. But instead, they might be losing a few points, which reminds them of what they need to be focusing on as they continue to develop. And by breaking up the task into smaller pieces, we are actually helping them build their skills. And we can also build in similar intellectual activities, similar components of writing, and spread them over different assignments so that they're not just doing it once, but they are practicing it over and over in small chunks. So that's another way of making the assignments more manageable for the students. And I call it frequent and low stakes assignments. And it can also be easier for teachers because when we have to read a large chunk of texts from each student, it takes time and we can't comment on everything. But if students are working on smaller pieces each time, then the amount of reading for each student is much shorter. And the amount of feedback that we have to provide is also much smaller. So it makes it easier for us because it spreads out the workload and into manageable chunks. And because learning and teaching happens over time, we can also assess where students are, what the common difficulties are, and then we talk about them to the whole class. Instead of waiting until students work on a big projects and then realize that, oh, they didn't know all these things, I need to correct them and teach them everything at the end, right? So there's a huge difference. So spread out the assignments, make it more frequent, but make it easier so that you can build students' strengths over time. Okay. And the deadlines, students do need to do their work. But because of the digital divide, some students may not have technology available in order to connect to the internet or to complete certain types of assignments. And if that's the case, we may need to give them hands or point them to resources and give them extra time to complete those assignments. So some level of flexibility is going to be really important when we are dealing with different circumstances for different students. And I know Chulalongkorn University, for example, have put in some resources to provide free SIM cards to their students so that if they don't have access to the internet, they can still complete their assignments. Now, that kind of adjustment is really important. So as individual teachers and as institutions, if we can think of these measures that we can take in order to help all students succeed, I think that would be really important in the near future. And giving students options is another important principle to keep in mind. Earlier, I said it's important to have students process their experience through writing, but we don't want to force them, right? So if students don't want to do a certain kind of task, or if they can't do certain kind of tasks, then providing alternatives where students can still learn what's essential, but not have to go through the hardship just to complete the assignment is something that we have to consider as we design our assignments. So instead of just giving one assignment that everybody has to answer, maybe give them 2 or 3 different options to choose from. And when they share their responses and provide feedback to each other, they can still learn something that they didn't learn from by not doing another alternative assignments, right? And so everybody will end up learning more when they have options and when they share their insights and their learning. So sharing, finally, is a really important aspect of writing assignments. In many classrooms, teachers give assignments, students would complete them, and then they might provide peer feedback once or twice in highly controlled environments. But after that, the papers are submitted to the teachers, and the teachers are the only ones who read them. Well, if you make student writing available to other students, then they can learn from each other. And also, in my experience, it contributes to reducing the chance of plagiarism or not completing the assignments. Because when students are writing for the teachers, it's only our opinion that matters. But when other students are going to read it, students have to perform in order to not embarrass themselves. Now, that's a powerful force in learning and teaching. So encourage students or require students to share some of what they do online. And when we use online platform to supplement our teaching, it actually creates that option, makes it much easier for students to share each other's work and then to comment on and learn from each other. So that's another important component of writing assignments in post-COVID-19 environment. And some of us are teaching academic writing courses. Others are teaching, incorporating writing into different combined skills courses, or we may be teaching specific genres. But if we are only learning a single genre, it's often difficult to know why we are doing what we are doing. But by moving away from the target genre and learning how other genres work, we can also gain insights that help us learn the target genre or academic genre better. So reading news articles and seeing how it's organized and thinking about why it's organized that way can be a useful activity. We can also look at video clips and think about how a particular video is structured in order to get the reader's attention, in order to provide the background information, in order to clarify and add some information. There are lots of things that are happening in other genres that are also found in formal academic genres. And when we can connect the knowledge of structure and functions from more familiar and more interesting genres to students personally, and then help them see how they are related to what they do in academic context, it can enhance our ability to teach more formal academic genres as well. And some of the informal genres are also highly relevant these days because students are being exposed to them, especially in relation to COVID-19. So the use of video clips to make a point, memes to highlight certain perspectives or pieces of information, insights. And that's also a good example. Infographics is a good way of summarizing, synthesizing, and presenting information in a very concise and informative ways. And we may also read satires or political cartoons. And the meaning or the intentions of satire is sometimes not clear. Some satire actually sound like a real story these days because things that are going around us are crazy. It's not something that we experience every day. It's not something that we anticipated, right? So being able to distinguish a satire from a real news story and is one aspect of critical literacy that we need. But also, it can teach us about how to take different perspectives so that we can see what's going on, not from the literal, not from accurate representation, But by flipping the story, sometimes we can see the significance of what we are experiencing better, right? So perspective taking in satire can be instructive in how we design our communication, infographics, memes, and even in academic arguments. Some of the things that I've written in academic contexts about grading, for example, is so counterintuitive that many teachers, when they listen to my argument, they misunderstand easily. So I have to explain again and again. And then when they repeat what they think they're hearing, it's the old assumption and not the new assumption that I'm presenting. So that happens in academic context too. So to present a different perspective and to communicate, to get people to break out of the mold, to get them to think differently is a challenging task. And right now in the US, and this movement is spreading all over the world, there's a movement called Black Lives Matter. And when people say Black Lives Matter, some people who are offended by this idea respond by saying all lives matter, right? And some people say that because they feel defensive. They feel like they're being attacked when somebody says Black Lives Matter. They feel like they're being called racists. So there's been a lot of resistance, but with the current news and current movements that's happening, and also some of the communication that's happening among people who are getting this information, more and more people are beginning to understand this new perspective, and then they are trying to spread their own versions of stories to help their peers become more informed and become more aware, right? So this type of understanding, taking in information and doing something with it, doesn't come naturally. It's something that takes a lot of practice. And even with practicing one domain of knowledge, it doesn't mean you can do it in another context when you are personally engaged or personally implicated, right? So giving them a lot of practice, awareness, moving back and forth between different genres, different types of communication is really important. And here's my attempt at creating a meme. And I'm not too experienced, but one day I was inspired. So I started creating this image by using my cell phone. And it's about physical distancing. And it said, stay 1 ppm away. That's me, PKM, Paul K. Matsuda. And my height is 6 foot and 2 inches, 6'2", which is about 2 meters, a little shorter than 2 meters. And so 6 feet is what people recommend in the US, because in the US, we don't use the metric system. So many people, I understand the metric system, but not everybody does. So 2 meters doesn't mean anything, but 6 feet is more understandable. But even then, how far is 6 feet, right? Not everybody's used to thinking that way. So using something that's familiar is a good strategy. And to me and to people around me, my height is familiar. So I used my own height as a way of communicating that insight, right? So there's a connection between personal experience and the communication that you create. And when I was doing this, I also thought of a vocabulary lesson, right? Now, I use the term physical distancing, but many people use social distancing, right? What's the difference between physical distancing and social distancing? Now, that's something that students need to think about, and you can have students discuss and decide which one is more accurate or which one's better in communicating what's really important. And the reason that I and many other people use physical distancing instead of social distancing is because when you say social distancing, it's not just staying away from people, but also not communicating with other people, right? And in the time of isolation, we need more social connections. We need to feel connected because we are so lonely. We feel sad. We need the social and moral support, right? So rather than saying social distancing, many people choose to say physical distancing. Now, there is another word that students can discuss. Can you tell which one in this meme? PKM? Yeah, of course. Why do you have to use PKM, right? I mean, you could use somebody else who is about 6 foot tall or 2 meters tall. Stay away, thank you. Yes. So stay away, right? And this was something that I just intuitively came up with. And some people use this phrase, but other people use another phrase. Stay home. Yes, stay home is important, or stay at home. That's another lesson, right? There's a difference between stay home and stay at home. And many people are saying, which one is more grammatical? Well, formally, it's stay at home. But does it matter? Because we understand stay home, stay at home, and use them interchangeably. But that's something that we can use in order to enhance students' awareness of how grammar, well, first of all, what's dominant and what's also frequent and popular. And we can also use this to show that grammar rules are not always absolute. It changes with time and it changes with social situations, right? And with this meme, the grammar point or the vocabulary lesson that I want to highlight is stay away. Stay away has a similar connotation to social distancing. You stay away from someone, right? And it's a one unidirectional perspective. I stay away from an object. That object may not be moving. But when you use an alternative phrasing, stay apart, then you are implicating both parties. Both parties are maintaining a certain distance, right? So in the hindsight, I thought stay 1 ppm apart might be a more appropriate phrasing because it puts the burden of distancing on both parties and not just one person. But at the same time, in real situations, like when I go to grocery shopping, many people are not wearing masks. I'm the only one who is wearing a mask. And I try to maintain a distance, but other people walk into my personal distance. So I have to step back. So in that situation, we are not staying 2 meters apart. I'm staying 2 meters away from them, right? So that's, okay, so that's another, that's an example of how we can build vocabulary lessons that's relevant to the current situation using different genres. Okay. And when we provide feedback, one of the things that's really important in post-COVID-19 situation is to consider students' emotional needs. Now, this has always been important, and it's something that I have always been working on, but I'm improving, but I'm never perfect at it. But when I meet with students to provide feedback, the first thing I ask is not about, so what do you have? What did you do this time? What did you improve? The first question I ask is, how are you doing these days? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? Do you feel lonely? Right? Addressing students' emotional needs in general is really important in post-COVID-19 context. And when we talk about writing, students might be writing about their experience, the experience of their parents, their loved ones. And if that's the case, my first response should not be, your message is not clear, or you need to use a different word for this, or your grammar needs to be fixed. That's not the most important thing. The first thing that I need to pay attention to is their own experience. And to show that, okay, I understand, I'm sorry that it happened to your parents or your friends, right? That's a really important aspect of feedback practice, that it has always been important, but it's even more important under the current circumstances. And some people don't have the time to provide feedback on all aspects of it. And if that's the case, the first place you can begin is to look at the overall effectiveness. Overall, is this piece of writing functioning, right? And even if there may be lots of grammar errors, there may be lots of things that are missing, but what's the most important thing that students are trying to convey? And do you see hints of those important messages, right? Now that's more important in writing than having perfect grammar or the perfect word choice. Having grammar and vocabulary is important. I'm not saying they are not important, but writing is not the sum of its parts, but writing functions as a whole. So we need to pay attention to whether students are accomplishing their purposes, whether they are expressing what they want to express, and then start from there. And if we were to provide feedback on the sentence structure and vocabulary, it's always important not to overdo it, because if we spend so much time providing feedback, students will be overwhelmed and they won't be able to learn as effectively. So rather than trying to convey everything, just focus on one or two key items, and ideally focus on sentence level errors or vocabulary issues or spelling issues that affects the overall effectiveness or communication. Because students tend to take in and take seriously the feedback that are related to their meaning. And when you're providing language as a resource to manifest their meaning, to express their ideas the way they want to, they are more likely to take it seriously and they are more likely to retain it. That's something we know from second language acquisition research. So if you have to choose among different types of feedback, focus on what's meaningful. Okay. And we can combine self-feedback, peer feedback, and teacher feedback. Students may ask for teacher feedback. They may not trust themselves or their peers, but that's because they have not been taught how to assess other people's writing and to provide effective feedback. So instead of doing all the work by ourselves as teachers, we can prepare students to become more critical of their own writing. And they can help students identify particular issues in other students' writing, and then give them the language, give them the strategy for providing effective feedback or suggestions. It takes time, but it can be done. And if you focus on maybe one or two grammar issues that are common among all the students, and then show them some examples and show them how you talk about those issues, and then have them practice with their own essays, writing, and have them practice the skills with peers, and then provide feedback on how they are doing or have them reflect on their experience, they are more likely to be able to provide the same kind of feedback when they see the same error in the future. And that reduces your burden as a teacher. And when you teach next time, when you provide another round of feedback, you can focus on something else and just remind students to look at what they have already learned in their own writing and then self-correct. And some of them can self-correct, and that's great. That means they are learning. Or they had already learned it before even you taught them. But either way, it's great when they can do it. But even if they can't do it, if students take it seriously and engage and try to work on that particular grammar issue, they are more likely to learn it. There have been some research studies showing that students who get incorrect feedback can acquire the correct form. It's kind of perplexing, but it happens because, well, the student was probably on the verge of acquiring it. But when somebody gives the wrong feedback, and if you question it, you are engaged, right? And that engagement, that thinking, that questioning leads to learning. it makes you curious. So when you see the same structure again, you look at it and think, this is more similar to what I did than the feedback, right? And that confirms their assumption that their original sentence is better than the feedback, right? And it can happen in many different ways. I'm just giving an example, something that I have experienced personally as well. But the point of providing feedback is not just to give them the correct answer. Because if the teachers or the peers are providing the correct answer, the student who is receiving the feedback is not learning. They're just getting the answer, and then they're just copying it. That's not learning. But when they question each other productively in a focused way, it can facilitate learning. Okay. And assessment is another important aspect of writing. And again, in assessment, we need to focus on the overall effectiveness first. And I have been advocating simpler grading because complex grading scheme often confuses students. But if you keep it simple, students are more likely to understand what they need to focus on. So don't use 10 different categories. Maybe limit your categories to 3 or 4 or 5 that are most important to you and most important and relevant to students. And don't try to use a 10-point scale, because if you have 10 points or 50 points, then it's really difficult for students to understand the difference between 5 and 6, right? But if you have a 3-point scale, and point 1 is it's approaching expectations. I see some efforts, but it's not at expectation, right? So that's 1 point. The second point, or I should say band, it's not a point, it's a band. The second band is acceptable or at expectation or meeting expectations or meeting standards, right? And that will tell students that it's good enough. You are doing what you need to be doing, but it could be better. And then if you want to create another category, you can create exceeding standards or expectations so that students will know that they've done something great, right? And for pedagogical purposes of giving feedback through grading, that's good enough, because the detail of high A's and low B's and these fine-tuned breakdowns are not meaningful to students. Students argue over it because they want a higher grade, but they may not understand necessarily the difference between B+ and A- in terms of the quality of writing. And as teachers, sometimes our grading is not that consistent. So if we have a 10-point scale, we can't always be accurate in our grading. We can't be consistent. But if we have a 3-point scale or 3 bands, then it's much easier to be more consistent. So keep it simple, keep it easy for students and for yourself. Right? And another important concept is learning over performance. Traditionally, when we assess writing, we tend to focus on the product. In teaching, we have been emphasizing the importance of not just the product, but also the process. Students need to learn the strategies and the processes of how to develop their writing and how to cope with different challenges they encounter. But in assessment, we have been highly product-oriented. And the product is not everything. Even if the final draft has problems, that doesn't mean students are not learning. And so I always try to supplement grades based on the product with my assessment of students' reflections. I ask students every time they submit something, what is your overall assessment? How did you do in this assignment? And what are you proud of? What did you do particularly well? And what did you struggle with? what were some of the difficulties, challenges, things that you didn't quite understand? And what do you want to improve in the future? Or what kind of feedback would you like to receive? That kind of informal self-assessment gives me lots of information about how seriously students are taking the assignment and how much effort they have put into it and what they are actually learning in the process, even though they can't quite present it in the form of a written text. That's more important to me as I provide feedback and as I assess students' learning than the neat, well-proofread product that they provide, because proofreading could have been done by somebody else, right? So I would put more emphasis on learning over performance in assessing writing. Performance is important, but it's not that important. And our expectation needs to be reasonable. We do still need to hold students to a high standards, academic standards we have always held students for. But there are individual circumstances that are related to COVID-19 or economic challenges or other difficulties, right? And being in a completely different online environment changes students' learning experience and their effectiveness as well. So we need to be reasonable in terms of what we can expect students to accomplish, and then set our standards and prioritize perhaps, so that we are holding students accountable for the most important points, but not everything else, right? And sometimes we need to learn to give them the benefit of the doubt. If students are late or they don't submit their assignments, we can't assume that students are slacking off. It may be that a family member was showing symptoms of COVID-19 and the student had to stay up all night to take care of that person, right? So again, ask them what's going on and see how you can help. Try to understand them as much as we can. And so that goes back to addressing students' emotional needs. So overall, post-COVID-19 L2 writing pedagogy is going to be more technological, and we are getting used to it. We are having this webinar in an online environment, and many people have gotten used to participating in webinars that nobody's trying to speak up in the middle of the lecture or showing some distracting slides and so on, right? So we are getting better, and that's going to bleed into what we do in the classroom and how we interact with students in everyday post-COVID environment. And we need to engage students. When students are distracted, when there are hardships, it's really hard to stay focused. So we need to find ways to engage students more than ever by caring about their well-being and by providing assignments that are relevant to their current situations. And we need to be more flexible so that students can actually learn what they can, given the circumstances. And we need to be realistic about the time it takes to complete certain assignments, the time and resources that it takes to participate in certain activities, and what outcomes we can expect from their performance. And we need to be humane in approaching our teaching, our designs, assessment, and our day-to-day interactions with students. This applies not just to the teaching of writing, but every interaction with anyone for that matter. Everyone's struggling in some ways. This is not an easy situation. So I'm going to stop talking. I've been talking for an hour, a little longer than I anticipated. And we still have about an hour of question and discussion time. And your microphone is muted. So if you want to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the participants button at the bottom, and you will see a blue hand. And when you click on it, you will see a blue hand next to your name. And then if I see that blue hand, I will prompt you. And then you can press and hold the space bar on your keyboard to unmute for yourself. And you have to press and hold until you finish speaking. And some people like to unmute themselves so that they don't have to keep their hands on the space bar. If you do that, you don't have to press the space bar. But remember to mute yourself again when you are done. And if you are going to speak, please consider using earphones to avoid unpleasant feedback problems. And I would love to see your face as you ask questions. So please turn on your video if you can. But if the connection is too slow, turning off your video might help so that I can actually hear what you are saying. And if you have questions, but if you are too shy or if too many people are speaking, then you can post your questions to the chat space. There's a chat icon at the bottom of the screen. And then you can type in your comments and you can send it to everyone. And then the moderator, Joey, will pick up on the questions and then send them to me personally so that I can respond to them. Okay? If you're ready, and take some time to think of the questions that you want to ask. But if you already have a question, I'm ready to answer your question.
Thank you so much, Professor Paul. We truly enjoy that talk, and I would say that empathy is actually the key to success to actually move forward from this pandemic. And if I may to summarize some points, I would say that all we need right now is to actually care. That means, give compassion to our students by attending not only to their academic needs, but also to their emotional needs. Perhaps we also need to assign homework that are not just relevant, but also something that would make them reflect and understand and perhaps develop a certain skill such as connections from issues, academic learnings, and of course reflection, which you have stressed pretty well, as this helps students to really learn from the feedback from the lecturers. Another is evaluation should be done holistically. I guess this is the best time for us to be more flexible about it. And lastly, I like this part when you said simplify assessment tools. Indeed, that most students are quite confused on what are they being assessed for. If they see a lot of, qualitative description of what those things are, they tend to be lost at a certain point. So thank you so much for that wonderful talk. We're now currently waiting for questions from our participants.